Imagine sailing into the unknown, wooden ships creaking against monstrous waves with nothing but the stars to guide you. What if I told you Christopher Columbus wasn't the first European to discover America? Nearly 500 years before Columbus ever set sail, the Vikings had already touched the shores of North America. Whilst medieval Europe was still cowering in the Dark Ages, these bearded Norse warriors were island-hopping their way across the Atlantic. Columbus was late to the party, and today we're going to meet the man who beat him by half a millennium, a Viking whose name should be in every history book, but somehow got relegated to the footnotes of exploration. So who was this forgotten explorer? Meet Leif Eriksson, son of Erik the Red, native of Iceland, and the original American explorer. Born into a family of troublemakers, his father was exiled for murder. Leif had exploration in his blood. But unlike his father, who actually discovered Greenland, Leif had his sights set further west. Legend has it he was blown off course during a voyage, but Vikings weren't the type to admit they got lost. They discovered things instead. The journey west would not have been a pleasant experience. Picture this: open-decked longships with minimal shelter, sailing through the North Atlantic's freezing gales and towering waves. Obviously there was no GPS, no weather forecasts, just the sun, stars, and a healthy dose of Viking stubbornness. Their ships, technological marvels of the age, were surprisingly fast but offered little to no protection from the elements. Crew members took shifts rowing, navigating, and probably questioning their life choices. Imagine spending weeks at sea, open to the elements, drinking stale water, only eating dried fish, and sharing very, very close quarters with dozens of unwashed Vikings. Personal space was unheard of, and yet these hardy Norsemen pressed on, partly for glory, partly for resources, and partly because turning back probably seemed just as terrible. Around the year 1000, Leif and his crew finally spotted land, what we know as Newfoundland, Canada. At Meadows, they established the first European settlement in the Americas. Archaeological evidence reveals a modest settlement, 8 buildings including a forge, carpentry workshop and living quarters. Not exactly a Viking town, but impressive nonetheless. They called this new land Vinland, supposedly for the wild grapes they found, although archaeologists suspect these hardened warriors might have been a bit optimistic about their wine-making prospects, or perhaps after months at sea, they were just really hoping for alcohol. Of course, the Vikings weren't alone in this new world. They encountered indigenous peoples they called Skraelings, not the most flattering name, but Vikings weren't known for their diplomatic niceties. Initially, relations were surprisingly peaceful. Trade flourished. The Vikings exchanged milk and cloth for furs and indigenous goods. But as with many historical first contacts, things eventually turned sour. Cultural misunderstandings escalated into hostility. One Viking saga describes a bull escaping and frightening the native population, not exactly the cultural exchange program they had in mind. Imagine trying to explain, through charades, why you brought a bellowing, angry farm animal across an ocean. These encounters represent some of the first documented meetings between Europeans and Native Americans, centuries before Columbus would make similar, equally awkward introductions. Despite their reputation as unstoppable conquerors, the Vikings' American dream ultimately failed. Why? To begin with, they were outnumbered. The local indigenous populations weren't particularly thrilled with these new, helmet-wearing neighbors. Also, supply lines were stretched extremely thin across 2,000 miles of treacherous ocean. Then the harsh Canadian winters proved brutal, even for people who named their homeland Iceland. And politically, Vinland was a low priority. Viking leaders were more concerned with conquering England and France, places with established cities to plunder. Why struggle to build log cabins in a distant wilderness when you could raid perfectly good European monasteries instead? So within a decade, the Vikings packed up and sailed home, leaving behind only ruins and a story few would believe. For centuries, the Viking voyages to America remained the stuff of legends. Norse sagas that scholars dismissed as myths alongside tales of one-eyed gods and world-encircling serpents. So Columbus took all the credit, while Leif Eriksson became a historical footnote. But in 1960, Norwegian archaeologists Helge and Anne Stein Ingstad discovered undeniable proof at Meadows. They found Viking artifacts dating exactly to Leif's time. This discovery rewrote history books and earned UNESCO World Heritage status. Interestingly, the Vikings' explorations had virtually no lasting impact on European knowledge. Their discovery was essentially forgotten until Columbus made his journey. Without their journey documented, the Vikings' American adventure faded into obscurity, remembered only in their oral traditions and later sagas. So what can we learn from Leif Eriksson and his forgotten voyage? Perhaps that history isn't always about who did something first. It's about who told the story best. Columbus had the backing of powerful kingdoms and a Renaissance PR machine. Leif had only Norse poets and their love of embellishment. Yet there's something profoundly humbling about these early Viking voyages. Men and women who sailed into the absolute unknown without maps or certainty, armed with nothing but courage and curiosity. The same human spirit that drove Vikings across the Atlantic still pushes us to explore the deepest oceans and the farthest reaches of space. History often forgets those who first dared to dream, but the Vikings' legacy endures, hidden in the pages of history, waiting to be rediscovered. So next October the 9th, why not skip Columbus Day and raise a horn of mead to Leif Eriksson instead? Because sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we nearly forgot.